Welcome back. Today, just going to be doing a little bit of work on the truck. Going to change the oil, do a little tune-up, grease the fittings. There's a little bit of a coolant leak we might look for if we've got time, but I want to focus on getting the oil changed. It's due for that. Getting the, something else we should be doing when we change the oils: grease the ball joints, grease the universal joints, things like that. Just regular upkeep, and these are the things that are going to make the truck last a lot longer. This truck has about 224,000 miles on it right now and still runs good. The only major thing I've had to do is they've got a problem with the spark plugs with this model year, so I've gone through and put sleeve kit in the spark plug holes. Other than that, it's been a great truck, great engine, it's run really well, but that comes with regular upkeep. I'm sure a lot of you already know how to change your own oil. I'm sure you realize that the cost savings on doing it yourself is next to nothing, if anything, with today's $20 oil changes anywhere you go, Jiffy Lube, Walmart, whatever. What you might not know, however, is that if you go to those places and only pay the $20 oil change, you're getting the shop oil, which is typically Valvoline, which is fine, but it's almost always going to be 10W30. That's what's cheap for them to use. They're barely making a profit off of doing it, so they're going to use the cheapest stuff they can. The 10W30 is the cheapest to use, but most vehicles nowadays don't call for 10W30. So it's not good for your engine. Modern vehicles use a thinner oil. These Fords, even though it's a little older, they call for 5W20. It flows better, keeps things lubricated better. That's just what it's supposed to have. That's what the manufacturer recommends you put in it. A lot of newer vehicles are even using 030, some 020 even, really thin, lightweight oils. And if you're just going somewhere and they're putting 10W30 in it, you're just kind of asking for trouble. You're going to lose some longevity. So that's something that everybody may not be aware of. So no, it's not necessarily cheaper to do it yourself, but this way I can make sure I'm getting the factory recommended oil filter, I'm getting the factory recommended oil specifications. It's just makes me feel more comfortable, and I know that my vehicle has been serviced properly. The first thing you want to do for an oil change is, it's a good idea to run the engine for a few minutes to warm the oil up. That way when you pull the drain plug, it's going to come out a lot faster. You're going to get most if not all the oil out that way. Just kind of thins it up, makes it flow better. So this has been run for a few minutes. What you don't want to do is run it too long, because it gets pretty hot, obviously. So if your temperature gauge is starting to climb up pretty good, it's probably a good idea to wait a little bit before you pull the drain plug. You don't want to burn yourself. But this is run for a few minutes, just long enough to warm up a little bit so we can pull the drain plug and get started from there. Okay, now in case you don't know where the drain plug is, you follow your engine back. This is the front of the engine. Follow it on back until you see the oil pan, and you'll have a little plug at the very bottom, kind of funneled out like that, and that's where we'll drain the oil out of the engine. Now you don't want to go too far back. If you can see back here, that's the transmission pan. Most times the transmission pan is not going to have a drain plug on it. Occasionally, if somebody's done work to it, you may find one that does have a drain plug, because it makes it easier if you need to change transmission fluid to buy a pan with a plug on it. But most times from the factory they will not have one, so you can usually just look for this little drain plug here. And you can see this is just the oil pan all sticking down off the bottom of the engine. Also, anytime you need to raise the vehicle up to work on it with a hydraulic jack, make sure you put a jack stand in as well. Hydraulic jack can fail, can suddenly release the fluid and pin you underneath the vehicle. It's always, always, always a good idea to use a jack stand, at least to brace it up. It doesn't take very much in the way of tools to change your own oil. All you really need, a set of wrenches or socket wrenches. An oil filter wrench is always a good idea. It's just a lot easier to get it loose that way. And an oil pan and a funnel. That's all you really need to change the oil. These model year Fords take a 15 millimeter. No, maybe not. Okay, so this model year takes a 5/8. I was thinking 15 millimeter, but the wife's van takes a 15 millimeter. That's on there a little snug. Once it starts to really loosen up, I'll just go by hand, and you can usually tell right before it's about to come out. Just try to get your hand out of the way. Now we'll let that drain. Just take a couple minutes here, and then we will put the plug back in so we don't make a mess on the floor. And then we'll get over here and pull the filter off. Alright, we're just barely dribbling out now. So we got enough of it out of here. Call it good. You're going to want to make sure, get your drain plug back in snug. It doesn't need to be super tight. Just snug it up so it's not going to leak. So this truck actually has what's called a remote oil filter, where instead of being on the engine, you can see the oil filter is actually right here in front of the driver's side tire. It screws into the same type of deal, but it actually has hoses that run back to the engine where the oil filter would normally be. I believe on this one it's routed like this because of the four-wheel drive system. Something in there gets in the way. It's probably almost impossible to get to the oil filter. So instead of doing that, they put a remote system on with hoses coming up here. This is where the oil filter wrench comes in handy. Once these have been on here for a little while, they get a little snug. This one seems to be exceptionally tight. And what I've just done here is actually punctured the filter, trying to get it loose. Alright, I finally managed to get it loose. That was on there just a little too tight. And actually, the oil that was coming down off of it ran right on the lens of my flashlight, so that's why we kind of lost visual there for a minute. Now, the filters that are sideways like this, or if they're angled down at all, they're gonna bleed out all over you. So it's not a bad idea to let them sit here and run like this for a few minutes, but I want to go ahead and pull it off. And just like the drain plug, you can feel when it's just about on that last thread, ready to come down. What I'll do is just tip it, turn it upside down. In my drain pan, I've got a little, I don't know, a little raised spot there to set it on where it'll allow it to drain out. That way we'll get most of the oil drained out of it before we go to put it in the trash. Now you can see my light was a little bit of a casualty there. Now the trick to making sure your new filter seals up properly is to lubricate this rubber O-ring here with the old oil. It doesn't matter, I mean, you can get it as it's dripping down from where the filter was, or out of your oil pan if it's clean. You don't want pieces of crud in here, but you just want to get this O-ring nice and wet and saturated with that old oil, and that's going to help it seal up when it goes on there. Alright, now that that's pretty well dripped and drained out, go ahead and install the new filter up here. And this just goes on hand tight. Again, you want to get it snug, but not too tight. Just about like that. And that O-ring, lubricated with that oil, that'll seal right up without torquing it down. You definitely do not want to use the oil filter wrench to put it back on. You don't want it so tight that you can't get it off. Like it was pretty much too tight when we just took it off. And there's also the risk of puncturing it while you're trying to tighten it down, so you don't want that. Hand tight, snug down is fine. Okay, so while we're under here, I'm going to go ahead and grease the lower ball joints. The upper ball joints on this are actually not serviceable, meaning they don't have a grease cert. They're sealed, greased, supposed to be greased for life. You'll see here is a little nub called grease cert. It's like it's just a one-way check valve basically for grease. The other side, got a little bit of crud on it. This is made to slip over that fitting nice and snug and seal up tight, so that as you squeeze the handle to push the grease in, it'll force its way through that one-way valve into the joint. And we're just going to put 2 or 3 squirts in. It's been a little while since it's been greased, so it's a good idea to grease these. Any of these fittings you find, it's a good idea to grease them every time you change the oil. These last ones here are the universal joints on either end of the rear drive shaft. Being a four-wheel drive, it does have two drive shafts, one to go into the front wheels, one going to the back. These I've replaced and put serviceable joints in. So I'll put a couple squirts in there, get all those caps full, and that just makes it last that much longer. I'll grease them every time we do an oil change. And a little trick, if you cannot quite get to the ones on these universal joints, you can actually jack the back end of the truck up, put it in neutral, and that'll allow you to turn the drive shaft freely. Back wheels spin freely, you can turn the drive shaft, and it'll give you a little easier access to these if you need to. So the last thing we're going to do is go ahead and fill the oil back up. This engine takes right about 6 quarts. It's clearly marked where your oil goes on all engines. Now, like I said, this one calls for 5W20. So I've got a 5-quart jug here, and then I've also got a couple of quarts in the truck. Now, it's a good idea to double check and make sure you put the drain plug back in before you dump all the oil in. It kind of sucks to dump 5 quarts of oil in, 6 quarts of oil, and crawl under there and realize it's all on the floor. Now, I know from doing this before that this truck takes right at 6 quarts. So I'm going to put 6 in, and then we'll check it. We'll run, we'll check the dipstick, see where it's at, and then we'll run it for a minute to give it time to fill up the oil filter and those remote filter lines. And then we'll check it again once it's circulated and make sure we're where we need to be on it. Now this just reminded me. See some weird brownish looking stuff on the cap there. It's kind of frothy. Don't be alarmed if you see something like that. What that is when it starts to get colder out, the moisture in the oil will boil out and it'll condense up in the valve covers on the cap. It's just water, a little bit of water vapor mixed in with your oil that's condensed in it. It kind of gives it a frothy, foamy look. But don't be afraid. Don't freak out if you see that. Most frequently, that's going to happen in the colder months. But it is common. I kind of freaked out myself the first time I saw it. I thought something was seriously wrong with the engine, but after doing some research, it is perfectly normal, especially in the wintertime. The dipstick on the engine will also be clearly marked. I can't get a good camera angle on this one, but it's right down here behind the power steering fluid reservoir. And these will all look a little bit different. The best thing to do is pull it out, go ahead and wipe the oil off of it, make sure it's clean, and then you'll stick it back in all the way and pull it back out again, and that is going to give you a nice visible view of where the level actually is. And you can see right now it's showing just over the maximum fill, and that's because it has not run yet, so it hasn't pumped into the oil filter in those lines. But that is also why you want to check it. You want to run it for a minute and then check it again to make sure. So we know that we're filled up there. I'm going to go ahead and run the truck for a minute, let it pump the oil through, and then we'll double check it one more time, and then we'll be good to go for now. Okay, so we're showing good oil pressure. That means it's pumping, it's making its way through the system, so we can go ahead and check the level again. Everything looks good, no leaks underneath. And now you can see still a little bit of dirty oil in there from before, but not bad. And we're right about where we want to be. I wanted to look for the coolant leak. I know there's a radiator hose on this side that's got just a slow leak. I've checked the coolant level every few weeks, and I've got to add a little bit every 3 or 4 weeks. But I can see where it's been wet down there after driving when it's hot. I'm actually out of time today, so I'm going to hold off on that. We'll do that in another video. But we've gone through, showed you, how to change the oil. If you didn't already know, how to do the grease the fittings. You want to check. There'll be a lot of, depending on the vehicle, there can be a lot, or there can be just a few grease zerks. I know this one had sealed universal joints, maintenance free, so they didn't need to be greased before. But I put new ones in. I put ones in that had grease zerks so I could check them and keep them alive a little longer. Ball joints, a lot of times, it just depends on what they've put in, whether or not they'll have a grease zerk. Some do, some don't. I know, like I said, the bottom ones on here do, the top ones do not. You'll see grease zerks at other places, like the steering linkages. Sometimes we'll need grease. That's what 2 of the fittings down front there in the middle were, where the control arm actually comes over to run both sides. You might also see them on the steering column itself. Usually different suspension parts will need grease. Just kind of look around, see if you see any of them. It's not a bad idea to throw a squirt or 2 of grease in them when you're changing the oil anyway. It only takes a few extra minutes, and it'll help make sure your vehicle lasts as long as it can and functions properly with minimal maintenance costs that way. So I hope you've learned something. Like I said, we'll look for the coolant leak on another video. Check that out, make some repairs there as needed. If you learned anything, give me a thumbs up, like the video, subscribe for more content like this. Let me know what you want to see. We do a lot of different stuff on this channel, so just let me know what you like, and we'll try to fit something in. So thanks for watching. We'll see you in the next video.